Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. And joining me today is California history teacher Isaac Newman. He's going to talk about a case that I've been reading about for a while, but with the news cycle being as it is, we haven't had a chance to sit down and talk with Isaac. Today we get that chance. He is suing his NEA affiliate union for illegal discrimination. And Isaac, first off, welcome to the show. Great to have you talking with us today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on.
So you're a high school history teacher in California. You're still doing that. What was the initiating event of the discrimination that you're discussing here?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a complicated story because it goes back a couple of years. This isn't something I did just sort of out of nowhere. I've kind of followed the process step by step, trying to get my union and my district to see reason, and it's just not working. And so ultimately we came to this court case. But I think it might be most useful to start at the court case itself. So
Sure.
What ultimately happened is I was looking for a way to fight the DEI that my union and my district colluded to mandate in trainings that we had. And it became apparent to me in that process that the union was actually taking the side of the district, that there's a core of leadership at the union who were every bit as enthusiastic for this toxic diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings as anyone at the district, and that they were working together to do it. And so at that point, having exhausted the grievance process, which you try and get the union to help you to dispute when the district is not following the contract.
Right.
And of course, it is against the contract to discriminate. So,
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And so I attempted, first I sent off a letter to the school board asking them to change these policies. I kind of highlighted exactly what was wrong with these trainings. That failed. They gave me the runaround. I eventually went to the union. They acted. A couple people there were actually interested and agreed with me. The grievance chair, for example, but ultimately it got up to the union, who makes the decision of whether to pursue a grievance. They refused. I had to push a grievance myself, but they still are the final arbiters of whether a grievance goes forward when the district then denies it, which of course they do. So yeah, it's kind of a long process.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, and that's typical of unionized workplace processes, and that's not a bad thing because unions are supposed to represent the workers that have elected them to that position. And when you're dealing with employment contracts, there's usually set processes in place to deal with these types of things. Right. And so, I mean, this is not unusual. It just takes a while to work through all these things, but usually the union's on your side when the contract gets violated. And it's a little odd that the union wasn't on your side in this instance.
Well, I've been a paying member of this particular union for almost a decade. So yeah, and I've come to expect the union to support you, certainly if it's something that's, a contract issue with admin. But this is something very different. So ultimately, it didn't come to a court case until I started looking to have a voice in the union. And when I went to do that, there's only a certain number of positions. They tend to line them up. They say, well, here's a position for the K through 12 rep. And here's a position for the, or not K through 12, but the 9 through 12 rep, and then the K through 6, and so on. So they have their elected positions in leadership are sort of divvied out by what your job is. And
Sure.
So the position that I would have wanted wasn't up for election. However, very quickly along came this position that they titled, interestingly enough, BIPOC position. And so this position, I mean, it's kind of funny because I decided, well, I should run for this to oppose the position as well as opposing the DEI trainings that are going through. And they give you an opportunity to write this little blurb, like a couple hundred words. And I sort of pre-wrote it. And the blurb was basically saying, a vote for me is a vote to see true diversity, true equity, right? In the sense of fairness, and to represent all employees equally. And before I could actually, put that forward, I had to fill out a Google form in order to run. And the Google form, on the form, there was a checkbox. So I don't know if you use a lot of Google forms, but you can set it to required, right?
Yes,
And so
yeah.
you have to check the box in order to submit it. And the checkbox basically said you had to self-identify as a person of color.
Yeah, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, or person of color. That's what BIPOC stands
Right.
for. We do a lot of writing and talking about DEI, and so the acronym BIPOC is very familiar to me.
Yeah.
And what that is doing, if they've set aside that position for only a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, what that is a quota system, and it is illegal to do that. It's illegal in California. Yeah, it's illegal in the United States. It's illegal in California. I believe, in fact, that there was a election, a referendum on that a few years back that the assembly was trying to actually reverse in this particular session, but didn't succeed in doing so. And that's especially true in educational settings. So it wasn't that you ran for the seat and you didn't win the election because the rest of your union members didn't support you, which I'm sure you would have been fine with accepting as a legitimate outcome of this. You weren't even allowed to run for this seat that was being opened up and designated a segregated seat, basically, is what it was.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because as soon as I realized that, I emailed the union president and as well as the union board, and I said, hey, is it the position of the union that not all employees are equal, right? That not all employees have the same privileges. And of course, they didn't respond by answering that question. They're not going to answer that question.
They wouldn't, yeah.
And in the email, I also asked them to postpone. Yeah, I asked them to postpone the election. I said, hey, understanding the fact that this election is segregated, that it's against, and I listed some of the board policies and other things. I said, I'd like for you to hold off on the election until this can be rectified. And now this was only a short time before the due date to turn in the form. And so, of course, the union president responds, I think the day after the form is due, saying, oh, sorry, I didn't get your email until just now. And he says in the email, rather interesting, he says, not only do I not have the power to do that, I wouldn't postpone it even if I could, making quite clear that, he's fully on board with this position and that he's in the tank for this kind of segregation.
Right. So your union is not only not representing you in this matter, they're actively working against you in contravention of the law. And just to be a little bit more specific about that, because I do have a little bit of data on this, that's violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, as well as California state law. So it's both federal and state law that this violates, and yet the union is backing the illegal position assumed by management. I mean, that's well. So
it's important to draw the line here because it gets confusing, I think, with some of the complexity of it, right? So what's happening is the union is actually creating this position. They're actually segregating their elections, which I think is important to understand.
So this is the union that's actually doing the violation. Okay, so this was I didn't quite get this. This is for an executive board seat for the union. Then.
Yeah, in order to attempt to, my thought was, well, I could have a voice within the union since they're the ones who pushed half of the DEI policy.
Gotcha.
And so it's not the district. It's important to get because some people think the district. Now the district is pushing DEI, and the union is working with them to push DEI. But the idea on my part was, well, I can't run for the school board because I'm a teacher, so I'm not allowed to be on the school board of
that makes sense, sure.
But I can run for a position within the union who I quickly recognized was fully on board pushing this. And so my thought was to do that. And so the illegality, blatant illegality comes in when the union decides to create a position that is segregated by race. And so I email the union saying, "Hey, you can't do this. Are you sure this is what you're trying to do?" And of course, they don't answer any of my questions other than to say, "No, we're going to move forward with this. And if you have any problems, you can talk to the CTA rep, California Teachers Association rep,
Right.
and who, of course, also basically didn't answer any of my questions and spent a month not answering my questions and simply giving me a runaround and eventually sent me back to the union." So it's kind of a circular system.
So, just to be clear on this, CTA is not the union that's involved in this. It's a different union.
Well, so yeah, see, union stuff gets complicated. So the
It does,
union,
yeah.
the Elk Grove Educators Association is a member of CTA. So
Gotcha.
CTA
Okay.
is sort of a statewide organization, a huge organization, and then they're also a member of NEA. And so they tend to get their legal advice and follow procedures that are laid out by CTA and NEA.
Which makes it so. So your union is basically a chapter of CTA. It may not be called that, but basically
Effectively.
that's what it is. Yeah, effectively, it's a chapter of CTA. Okay, so that makes sense. So now you filed a lawsuit, right? You have filed a lawsuit against this chapter of the CTA, the local chapter here of your union, to force them to stop discriminating. First off, how long is that? Because it's been a while since we set up this interview.
Yeah.
Because again, fire hose of news cycles.
Like I said, I can't even imagine.
Well, I appreciate your patience because this is an interesting story, and I definitely wanted to have this conversation with you. When did you file the lawsuit?
So it would have been just at the I forget the exact date, but it would have been just sort of at the start of summer, right?
Oh, the start of the summer. A couple of months, maybe a month and a half, a couple of months ago, something like that. Have you received a response from the union to the lawsuit filing yet?
They've asked for more time, which we granted them. But
yeah, that's typical.
Yeah, no, that's pretty standard. So that's basically all they've said to us publicly. The head of the union went out and blamed all of this on nefarious outside actors and right-wing extremists who are trying to, I think his term was, sow fear in the community. And it's so funny to me because I actually grew up in this district, right? I went to elementary school to junior high. I actually teach at the school that I went to.
That's pretty cool, actually. Yeah. I'm sure that it's sort of a welcome back Cotter vibe, actually.
Well, and it goes further than that. My mother retired from the district, so she taught science and math in the district. My father taught at the local community college. So I've literally grown up in the district, and for them to say, outsiders are involved, and I'm sitting here thinking when they said that, well, I'm pretty sure that I'm more of an insider than you in terms of someone who has a stake in the system. I grew up here, and I'm teaching here, and I'm in it for the long haul. And that's why I'm fighting against this, because they're utterly dismantling the education system. They're dismantling our schools. They're dividing us by race. They're resegregating in every way that they're able to. They're turning teachers and students into oppressor versus oppressed with the DEI trainings and so on.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that in your op-ed at the Hill, right? About the reason why you're so opposed to this new pedagogy is because it is so divisive and it's really so disconnected from education. And we talk about this a lot at Hot Air. I mean, we do. My friend Adam Baldwin and I, when we have our, twice weekly podcasts, we often talk about DEI and the Marxification of education. I don't know if you want to go in that direction or not.
Oh, I'm fine with that.
Oh, okay. There you go. But I mean, even if you don't want to get into the Marxification aspect of this is not education. This is an indoctrination. And I think that is where your objection to this is because you're no longer teaching. You're basically indoctrinating students into a political ideology.
Well, let me give you some examples of the trainings that I was initially opposed to, because I've been teaching for almost 20 years, and I would have to say I've spent almost no time at board meetings. I don't, until recently, I didn't watch them. I didn't pay attention to them. I felt that things were going well if I didn't know the district was there. I don't want to know they're there. I don't want to have to deal with, their politics or anything else going I'm focused on the classroom and the students. And increasingly, things have rolled downhill that have made it impossible to ignore the politics at the district and the politics that have been growing up in the union, apparently, as well. And so let me give you a couple examples of the trainings that they mandated. So they mandated 28 hours of these trainings a couple of years ago. And this is what really got me, trying to convince. It started off with an email to the school board to try and get them to stop. So 28 hours of mandated trainings, and they're put on by this company called Epoch, which Hannah Grossman actually did a great article on the head of Epoch training, I think Nancy Dome. And she's the one who called the American flag a hate symbol. She also, I think, she says something in some of her videos, not in the trainings that we've had, but in some of her videos outside of them, where she talks about, people who are resistant to DEI need to be, talked to, and if they continue to be resistant, then the healing way to deal with it is to remove them, right? So, in other words, fire employees like me. And that's pretty consistent with Robin DiAngelo, who was one of the people in the videos that were involved in our training. So Robin DiAngelo in her video, How to Talk About Race, which I can give you a link to if you're interested at a later point.
Not particularly. I know who Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, and this quote will tell you all you need to know about that video. But in the video, in this mandated training, she says something on the order of, growing up as a white person in this society, I am a racist, right? In other words, being white makes you racist. And so that was one of the examples that I gave to the district, saying, hey, this is racism. You're teaching not just my coworkers, but my children's teachers, because my children go to school in this district. You're teaching my children's teachers that they're morally inferior on the basis of their race, that being white makes them morally inferior.
Right.
And that was part of the basis of my grievance, and part of the basis. I even eventually put up a harassment claim through the district, and they also, denied that multiple times, right? Because of course the funny part is, who decides whether the grievance goes forward? Ultimately, it's the union. Who decides whether a harassment claim goes forward? Ultimately, it's the district. And so neither of them, shockingly, thought that they were guilty of harassment or racism.
Yeah, and again, this is for at least a couple of decades, the principle, the aspiration, let's just call it the aspiration. The aspiration was the colorblind society, right?
Yep.
And this was directly from Martin Luther King's speeches, that
Absolutely.
they would come when we judge people on the content of their character and not the color of our skin.
Right.
And that had been an ideal around which we had been forming for at least 20 years or so, maybe 30 years,
right,
after his assassination. And were we getting there? I think we were. Were we there yet?
Say that.
Probably not, but at least we were getting a lot closer to having that sort of, equality-based system. This is completely different. This is actually its opposite, which is that, and this is a way that I always explain it. And so one of the reasons too, Isaac, that I used to hate talking about this is because the system that they're proposing gives you no solutions whatsoever, because it is determinist based on immutable characteristics. In some cases, it's immutable based on feelings. That's the identitarian, or the sexuality part of this. But when it comes to race, and which is, I think, the big, tripwire here for you, there's no solving that solution. It permanently divides people up into camps, and it requires a higher power to decide the distribution of social goods within the system, rather than having people compete in the marketplace based on their own talents and skills. And that's the issue here. Yeah. And the reason why it is so compelling for people who have power, and that includes unions, right? Especially in California, is because they're the elites that are going to make those decisions. It gives them the power to make those decisions, and it takes the power away from individuals to do so on their own judgment.
They're the ones giving out indulgences.
Thank you. And I'm Catholic, so I get that.
Well, exactly. No, if you look at it, so one of the other things in the training, they have a booklet that comes with it, and there's a chart in there that I think is really it really shows what it's all about. The chart includes on it, for example, color blindness, and it lists that as a racist myth.
Yeah.
It also lists meritocracy as a racist myth. Now, let's think for a moment what that means for a classroom. So, if colorblindness is a racist myth, that means that you need to treat every student differently based upon their race. That is, as you pointed out, the opposite of what the civil rights movement was fighting for, and through great sacrifice and pain, somewhat arrived at. Right? The If you also say then that meritocracy is a racist myth, well, okay, so do grades matter? Um, how did the board members get their seats? Well, must not have been through meritocracy. We don't have that. I actually called them on that, and they didn't respond to that. But but that's the reality is you're actually dismantling the entire raison d'etre, the whole point of existence for education, because you're saying, well, we can't measure um your capabilities because there's no such thing as merit. All that matters is your birth, right? Not what you do or what you try to achieve. And in fact, the message to students is even more grim, because the message to students is, okay, one, if your teacher doesn't look like you can't learn from them, because
Right.
they can't understand you, right? And it's kind of ironic, because the whole point of education is learning from people who have different experiences from you, not only trying to learn from people who had the same experiences. But setting that aside, so the first message is you can't learn from teachers who look different than you, and that, I think, is fantastically problematic. The second subtext within this message is that um, you know, there's no point in actually trying to learn, because the system is tilted against you. So the only thing you can do if you want to achieve and to learn is become an activist. And then you have to ask, well, an activist for what? And that is an activist for the politics of these particular union leaders, these particular board members, some particular teachers, the ones who are pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion. What they're really doing is they're giving themselves an excuse to politicize the classroom and try to teach their students to believe their politics instead of teaching them how to think. It's teaching them what to think.
Right.
The reverse of the old acts, right?
It's indoctrination. I mean, and it gets right to the core of what you're arguing, what I'm arguing, right? This is not education, it's indoctrination. And they are very different things. And it's now, I mean, we talk a lot about this in terms of higher education, right?
Yep.
But I think people have gotten the message more recently that this is something that's occurring as early as kindergarten now. Mainly because the people who are in charge of the unions and in charge of teachers unions and places like California, the school boards and the assembly are all in on this same purpose, which is Marxification, basically, is just to float back over into that stream. I'm throwing that out there in case Adam is watching the watches the podcast.
And they're really looking for opportunities to insert it. So when COVID hit, right, one of the term that was floated around through a lot of districts was this idea of giving students grace. And the idea was, which is a semi-religious way of talking about it, which is rather interesting to start with. But when you say this idea, let's give students grace, what they really meant was let's lower the bar. What they were saying is, let's in our district and other districts, they actually basically said if they were already passing, you could not give them a lower grade than what they had at the start of COVID. And I understand the attempt there was, well, they're not getting the same level of education, et cetera. But what that segued into was a greater discussion about grading that continued much after COVID, during and after. There's this book that makes the rounds. One of the ways that ideologues spread these sorts of methods of teaching and sort of these ideas throughout a district is through these book studies. And so one of the things districts will do is, in order to move up the pay scale as a teacher, you have to get a certain number of hours in trainings and things. And these,
Sure.
if you take part in a book study, that can count as some of those hours. And any teacher can kind of put one of them forward, but the district also was sort of pushing some of these. One of them was grading for equity. Joe Feldman, I think. And so I actually joined the book study for this, already knowing how they use the term equity. I'm probably going to have some concerns. And I
Right.
joined the book study for it. And it's a bunch of colleagues and everything. And you sit in there and you read a chapter a week or whatever, and you meet and you talk about it. And to give you the short version, what the book really suggests is a couple things, right? The goal is to throw out the old traditional grading, A, B, C, D, et cetera, and to shift over to a 4-point system where there is no zero, right? So your minimum grade would be like 25%, right?
Sure.
But recognizing that it's hard, districts actually have a whole bunch of politics about allowing, how the grade system works. So in most districts, without a change at the district level, you're going to still be required to give an A, B, C, D, et cetera. So what it suggests in the interim is to basically give 50% instead of zeros. So if a student doesn't do an assignment, they're meant to get a 50%. And there are a lot of teachers who were convinced by this, right? And they would argue, well, it's not fair, because if you think about it, the drop from an A to a B, that's 10%. The drop from a B to a C, that's 10%. Why do you suddenly get this 60% from a did nothing to the D minus, right? Why is there this 60% jump? They said, well, that's not fair. They say that it tilts towards failure. And the funny thing is, so I'm sitting in this meeting, and one of these meetings, and I give the argument. I say, well, hang on a second. Let's just look at a typical multiple choice test, right? Let's say that you have 4 questions on a multiple choice test, and someone guesses every question, right? Well, statistically speaking, they may get as much as 25% right. If they actually knew a few things, they might get 25% on the ones they guessed, and maybe another 25% they knew. Do you want your doctor, the person building a bridge, et cetera, do you want them to only know 25% of the material?
Right.
I mean, there's a reason we set 60%, and it's because we don't want you to know half the material. We don't want you to know 25% of the material. We think the minimum acceptable amount for a human being in a classroom for a year is, okay, at least 60% of what you're doing. And it was funny because one of the other teachers in the room, they got kind of tired of me arguing with them, because most of the people in there are following along and agree with it.
Sure.
And one of them says, well, why would you join this book study if you don't agree with the book? And I said, well, do you only read books that you agree with? Do you only join book studies in order to parrot what it says? I said, I'm here because I think a lot of this is fantastically dangerous to the educational mission, and I'm going to have a voice with the people who are on the ground level thinking about implementing this. And it was funny because to join the book study, originally there was a Google form that required you to say that you would implement these things in your classroom. And I refused to do that on it. And I said in the form, I'm not going to promise to implement this without reading it first. And they still let me in, which was good. And there are some good things in the book. It does talk about not grading on behavior. So, maybe not docking people points for going to the bathroom, which some teachers do, which I find problematic. But overall, it's a very concerning book. And it's just one example of how the diversity, equity, and inclusion ideology is actually rolling into the classroom at every level, in elementary school, in junior high and high school, just as you said.
Yeah. I mean, and we're seeing the results of it. And look, I mean, I tell this story often. When I was in college, and this is 1980 and 1981, I actually volunteered for the faculty student curriculum committee.
Right.
It was fascinating, right? One of my professors was actually on the committee, and he's the one who asked me to do it. It was a poli-sci professor I had, and I never ended up graduating from college. And I spent about a year or so on this committee, though. And at the time, the big issue there was adding. This is a 4-year university, right? It's Cal State Fullerton. I'm sure you know the Cal State system. So it's a commuter university.
Yes, US.
So they were adding in remedial math and remedial writing to the curriculum, and it was coming to the curriculum committee, and they were called 99 courses 44 years ago. They were called 99 courses because college courses start at 100, right? So they were calling it writing 99 and math 99. So they didn't have to use the word remedial. And I said, why are we doing this? If you need remedial math, why don't you go to a community college before you go to university? And better yet, why aren't we asking the high schools not to graduate people who can't do math or basic composition? Because those are basic skills that you're supposed to know when you get out of high school. And even then it was, well, there's reasons, because reasons. So we need to be responsive to this. And again, myself and a couple other people on the committee were saying, yeah, but this isn't the place for that. This is the place for people who are prepared.
Right.
Community college is the place for that. If you need remedial work, you go to community college, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what it's designed to prepare people to eventually transfer to 4U universities, or to get, particular, skill set certificates. I mean, that's the other function for community colleges.
Well, it's the outcome-based push, right? So diversity used to mean diversity of thought. Now it means diversity of appearance, right? Equity used to mean fairness, but fairness is where I get what I deserve, you get what you deserve. Equity is where you get what someone who looked like you deserved, maybe. And inclusion is, well, it's not very inclusive. I actually found that I was excluded from that leadership position because of my race. And so it's almost 1984, up is down, left is right, good is bad.
It's getting there. But I mean, the point I was making is that there's been a retreat from actual education that's been going on for a lot longer than DEI.
Yeah.
But it was also fueled by, I don't think they called it equity back then, but it was fueled by the same kind of impulses that, well, you have to make allowances for certain classes of individuals because we can't expect them to have been educated in these things. And so this is just a more ideological version of stuff that was already happening in the 1960s and 1970s, in which, I fortunately, coincidentally, probably mostly had a ringside seat to, because I volunteered for a student position on a curriculum committee. And that has always stuck with me, and it has always made me suspicious about trends in education. So I know we got to wrap this up. Isaac, is there some way that people can find out more about your fight here? Do you have a website? Do you have some sort of place where people can go to get updates or to support what it is that you're doing?
Well, interestingly, no, not a whole lot for me. My website is a class website. I thought about it. I'm not, like I said, tried every stage of the way to go, baby steps to try and get the district and the union to change what they're doing. I really didn't want to have to be the person to drag this out into the light, but that's where it is. And so the best place would be to go to the Fairness Center's website. They've been amazing in supporting me. I believe it's fairnesscenter.org. But they've been amazing in supporting me. They support others who have issues like this. When I think about one of the things I hope that comes from this is not just getting my union and my district to stop this sort of racial segregation, but I'm hoping that other teachers will also push back, because there's a tendency to just put your head down and say, well, I don't want to be labeled as either the problem or racist or whatever else they want to label you as because you're fighting racism. But the message to other teachers and other people in this position would be, hey, join those book committees, even if you disagree with it, especially if you disagree with it. If the district is doing something wrong, email the board and let them know. If they won't do anything, seek out help from your union. And if the union is also against you, then talk to someone like the Fairness Center. But go through the process. You will find allies in unusual places, and you'll find that there are a lot more people who agree with you from both sides of the aisle, who just want to teach and don't want to see the bar lowered for our students.
And parents who just want their kids to actually get educated rather than indoctrinated. And you're going to find that across the entire spectrum of all different races, classes, and creeds, because people care about their kids and understand that an actual education is a way to unlock those social goods, and to do so through individual effort. And so, Isaac Newman, you're fighting the good fight. I'm glad that we took the time, finally got this interview done. And I'm hoping we get a chance to talk more, because clearly we've got plenty that we could chew on down the road. So let's stay in touch and see what we can arrange later on down the road.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.